Now we will draw the elevations for the dwelling. Before we draw the elevations, we can create a copy of the existing floor plans. Let's just copy that over by a good safe distance. And then we're going to create a block out of that just so that we don't amend it by accident. So just create a block and call it something like plans. Base point doesn't really matter, but we'll choose the bottom corner of one of the plans. Okay, so around that then we need to create a box. We're going to put that on the walls layer for now, and just give a safe margin, a safe margin around the outside of the plans. So we'll start off by drawing the front elevation, which on the ground floor has these doors, windows, and that window, and on the first floor has these windows all showing. For the ground floor then, let's draw a line from this point up and overlap that line at the top there by quite a margin. We need to make sure that polar tracking is on. I think it's working. Okay, and then we can copy that line to show us where the door openings are going to be and the window openings, and where the wall changes, and also where the windows are and the other side of the house. Now what we can do is change those three lines to a different colour. Let's just make them blue for now, and we know that those lines are where the walls are. The other lines are where the doors and windows will be. So that line we can explode, and this bottom line we will use as the base line for the elevation. So we'll start off and offset that by 150. And we'll just put an end on those two lines over there. We can fill that in later with solid hats. Next then we need to put in another line of 150. And that line will represent the difference in ground level at this line and inside floor level here. So now we can change that line to yellow, and what we also need to do is change the line type. Now we'll have to load a line type, so click Other and click Load, and then we can choose this top line here. It's a dashed line. Click OK, and now select a line and click OK. For that line then we need to just check what the line type scale is, and I think for it to print properly the scale we need, it's 0.5. Now it might not show us a dashed line at this point, but hopefully later when we come to plot it, it will be. So that level there is the internal floor level. At this stage then we can offset that line by 2100, and we know that that will be the head height of the windows. However, that line needs to be green and solid, so we can copy the properties across as we've just done. And for this one here, that is an opening. So we can use the fillet tool, and the door head height will be at that height, and also at the bottom, so we can trim off using the dashed line at the bottom like so. And it's probably best just to fill that line in as well at that point. Now the other ones are windows. So let's just check from the other plan what height those windows will be at. So the sill height is 1050. So we can offset that line. And we also need a line going across at the head height there again. So we can fill those in with two rectangles just at that point and that point like that. And the sill height for the other window is 600. So offset by 600. And there's where that window belongs. We can delete the temporary lines like so. Okay, so on the ground floor we know that we have that window, these two windows, and the door opening. Next then we need to think about, we've deleted that line by accident, so do that again. Next we need to think about the level where the first floor will be at, so let's check the dimensions there. So it's 2,800. Okay. And then the other thing that we know at this point is, or we need to know, is the head height of the window, so that will be 2100, but also the distance from the bottom of the fascia to that level is 2,400. So that's offset first of all by 2100 for the window head heights, and then 2400 for the level of the fascia. And we can just match properties again for those two lines there. Now, at this point we can afford to trim off the wall lines. We know where they are, the bottom of the wall anyway. And we also now know that the top of those lines will finish at the fascia, so it's that line there. And next we can begin to add the windows at the first floor level. So take that line up. We don't really need that line actually, so let's just move that first one. And then let's copy that line across for each of the window openings, just being careful to get the end point each time. Again, we don't need where the wall changes there, but we do need the window openings over here. And then when we're drawing these in, we need to compare the window heights here. So let's just take a dimension on these windows. The four windows on the front are all the same at 1050. So offset 1050. And then we can draw in the rectangles just representing the position of those windows. nice and symmetrical there with those two windows above the ones on the ground floor. And then let's just double check the distance, or the height of the sill and the other window. It's 600 again. So offset 600 from that finished floor level. Once again, we can draw a rectangle in there. Then we can delete the temporary lines. Now next we need to think about the position of the fascia and the soffit and the rest of the roof. But part of this we'll not be able to do until we draw the side elevation. So first of all, let's put in the fascia, and let's also maybe think about some of the downpipes and so on. Now at this stage really what we need to do is create another layer and call it roof. So GA roof, and for the roof I'm going to make the main colour for that blue, I think, and the line thickness can be 0.25, and we can close that. Okay, and that line there, we'll put that on the roof layer. The fascia will overhang at the side by 200mm. So let's do that on both sides of this part of the wall. And the other side, well, it's at a different height, but we can put that line in for now. And then we can draw the line up for the roof, but we don't know just the height of the roof until we work that out geometrically on the side elevation. So let's make that layer current. And we can copy that line across like so. And we can get rid of the temporary lines. Again, that line, I suppose we can copy that over there. And just delete that line for now. Those wall lines, we'll just turn those back to the colour that they need to be, which is by layer. So we can offset by 200mm, which is the height of the fascia, and then we can trim off using those two lines. That's the position for the fascia on this element of the front elevation. And still also on the roof layer, we can now draw some downpipes. So let's offset by 75mm just from one side here, and offset again by 75, and we'll take those two lines and just turn them to a red colour, and then we can also offset by 50 from the top of the fascia down, and offset by 75 again, and just make those red as well. And then we can extend by clicking on the line we want to extend to, and then selecting the lines we wish to extend, and then we can trim out in the middle like so. And if we select those two lines, it'd be good maybe to have a downpipe on the opposite side. So let's just mirror around the centre of that top line there, and we can trim out on the other side. Now, the windows will also need to have a sill, so let's do that part of the detail now. Might be useful to explode that rectangle, and then we offset by 140, which is the depth of the sill. And then if we draw a line on the correct layer, of course it needs to be the walls layer, a line in here, we can offset that by 100. Then we can mirror that around the center of the window and extend the lines like so. Now we can explode that one, delete that line, and because those windows I think are the same size, aren't they? Okay, so we can delete that line and copy those across. And then we can explode these windows. And a nice simple way to make this easy is to copy that across in relation to the other, and then copy these three lines across, and then we can trim it. And because those are the same, we can copy those, and the windows on the bottom floor are also the same. Okay, and then finally these other two windows, explode those lines, and let's copy that across like so, and these across in the same way. And then we can use the extend tool again for those, and because they're the same size, again we can copy that down. So at this point, that's probably all we can do with the front elevation without drawing some more on the side elevation. Next we will draw one of the side elevations. So from this view here, we can rotate the drawing by 90 degrees, and then we will use this side of the rectangle as the base point. Once again we can offset by 150, and again by 150, and then we can match the properties from the finished floor line like so. Now there will be other lines there that we might be able to transfer through, so if we draw a line from that intersection or the corner of the first rectangle, and making sure that the ortho is on and also has the 45-degree angle set, we can draw a line up at 35 degrees, and from that then we can take a line that will show us exactly where the first floor level will be, and similarly with the underside of the fascia we can do the same, and also the top of the fascia. Now with those two lines, what we can do is actually mirror them, and then we can apply the properties over like that, delete these lines, and again match the properties and delete that line. And then we can use the stretch tool to take that far enough over. So at this point we'll use the ground floor as the basis for the plan or for the elevation, and we can take a line up from this side. Really it should be, since it's that elevation that we're going to draw, and we'll go to the underside of the fascia, and we can select that line and copy it, and really should have made that first line longer, so let's do that now. And we can copy that line to each of the positions where there's going to be a door or a window like the previous elevation. And don't forget, when looking at the side elevation, you will also see the lean-to roof at the back of the house, and we need to include that. So again, we can temporarily change the colour of some of the lines just so that we know that the blue lines are walls. And then once again we know that this is a door, so we can offset by 2100, and we know then in here, in that position, there's a door. Then in this position there is a window, and let's just check what height the sill is. So it's 600, offset by 600, insert the window, and then over on the side here we have a door, but this time actually the door head height may not necessarily match with the others. This door could well be at a slightly lower level, then again it might not be, so I think we'll just leave the door head height as it is, and we can slope the ground outside afterwards. So we'll insert a door just at that level, and then we can delete the temporary lines. Now again, this is the level for the first floor, and we need to check what's on the first floor on this elevation, and there are no windows at all here, so we can go straight to the eaves level, and we can begin to work out what's happening with the roof. So let's offset by 200 millimeters to get the level of front fascia, and then it's this line here really that we need to use for the back of the house, because this is the main part of the roof. Just to have a preview, this is going to be the elevation here. So we offset there already by 200, and we can draw in the line of where the fascia would be. Of course, that line really should be part of the roof layer. And then on the other side, we've already offset that, so we can now trim that on the opposite side, and that's where the fascia would be. And again, we can trim over here the extra lines, and as well trim over there. Now let's just check the angle of the roof. So the angle of the roof is 30 degrees. So now again we need to draw a line on the roof layer from the outside face, and this time we want the line to be at 30 degrees, so again we can add in an extra tool if that worked. Okay. There's it snapping now. And then from the opposite side we can draw a line, and where those lines intersect is the pitch of the roof. And then we know as well that barge board would be 200, So we can offset those lines and trim like so. Now, just to refer to the other elevation again, there's going to be part of the barge board that ends there because of the shape of the house at the front. So we need to offset once again by 200, overhang for that wall, and then we can draw that line back in there, and then we can trim off the wall. Let's try that again. Trim off the wall above that line and the fascia below it, and then we can trim the fascia off above that line. And as well as that, then we can offset by 200 and take this line up, and that will allow us to finish off the fascia and the barge board on both sides. So let's trim between those two lines like so, delete that line, and then trim off the additional parts and lines that we don't need on both sides. As well as that, then we can copy this line up in its relative position, and that will allow us to fill it out the other lines, and then we'll just copy that line down and finish off the fascia on that side. Now that we have the roof height, that also allows us to take that line back through this 45-degree line, and that will allow us to fill in the information on the other elevation. Now, with the other lean-to roof here, we need to know what height that is. So the fascia is 2,400 from that first floor, or finished floor level, which has now disappeared. So let's just copy that line down. Must have deleted that at some point. And we can offset 2400, and we know that's where the fascia is going to be there. So let's copy that line from this point. Just make sure we do that accurately. Bring the fascia to. So copy to that point there. And then the angle of this roof, I think, is different, so let's just double check the angle. So it's 25 degrees. So in this case, it's probably best to draw a line and then rotate it by 25 just to make sure you get the right angle. We'll rotate that again by 180. No. Mirror it. And that will give us the angle for that roof. Then we can extend it to the wall and offset again by 200. And then we can trim, and we can finish off the fascia. This time the angle is a little bit different, so the line will be shorter, but the principle is the same. So that's the basis of the side elevation and we've also done the outline of the front elevation, but we need to go back and try and finish a little bit of that first. So let's rotate the drawing back round, and we need to transfer through this line here. And we'll also copy that over by 200. Then we can mirror that line and that will give us the right position for the fascia on this elevation. So now we can trim that line there and trim it here. We can trim the end of the roof below that, and we can also use the fillet tool here and the fillet tool there, and that's the shape of roof on that side. Extend the wall to meet that, and it's probably best to put a gutter and a downpipe on that short section of roof as well. Oops, let's try that again. So copy from that point to that point. We can trim and trim out that part of the fascia there, and then we will need to extend the downpipe to the ground level. And that is the basic outline for the front elevation. So you'll need to follow the same principles with the back elevation and the other side elevation. Make sure that as you're doing it, you draw through the plan out to the far side. Once the general outline of the building and all the openings are inserted, your 4 elevations should look like this here. Of course, all rotated around using this tool up here. Whether you decide to keep them like that and rotate and add the extra details is up to you. Alternatively, you can put them all in a line, and we'll look at them like that in just a moment. So if we have the elevations all lined up like this, we can then begin to add in some details for the windows and the doors. So let's do a window first of all, and the principle for all the windows is fairly similar. So let's offset by 50 from each side of the window, and put those lines on the window layer. We can also use the match properties tool to help with that. And down the middle of the window then we can draw a line to show where the window might split in two, offset by 25 in both directions. And then we would know here that this could be a fixed part of the window, so we can put a rectangle in there. And actually on this side it will be a little bit different. It will, because it's an opening light, the frame will actually be overlapped by the opening light. So let's offset again by 25, like so. And really that gives us the basis of where the opening light would go. So it's closer to the reveal and the head and also the sill. So we can draw a rectangle from that point there down to that point there. Then we can delete the lines that we don't need. Then offset again by 50, and that is where the opening light would be. And as well as that, then we need to know how the window might be hinged. So we can draw a line, another line to indicate that, and we can apply a dashed line to that. And obviously then that needs to be able to print out at the right scale. So effectively, if you look at the elevations on Blackboard, you can copy more or less the same style of windows that are there. You might need to guess a few things here and there. Again, this side window at the side has two opening lights, and then the corner window, you do need to take a little bit of care with that so that you show the pillar in the middle as such. Although I would suggest that that can be trimmed out if necessary. And also the windows on the rear elevation, that you put those in correctly. And that one there is probably small enough not to need an opening light, although being at the top of the stairs, it mightn't be a bad idea just to split that in two so that there is something that opens. And again, we need to use that fillet tool over here at the side just to show that window correctly. So that's the general principle for the windows. Let's take a moment just to look at the doors. That one is a sliding door, so it's basically working from the plan and trying to figure out that one there, just trying to figure out what's happening with the frame and replicate that on the elevation. This one here then should really be drawn on the door layer, so I'm just going to lift those lines and put those on the door layer like so. And there doesn't need to be a letterbox on the back window, but just something indicative so that it's clear that it's a door. Again, the lines here seem to be in the windows layer, so we'll just move that over to the doors layer. That's more of a panel door. You may want to go to the detail of putting a handle on, maybe a handle over here somewhere too. With the front door, it is a good idea to show the letterbox somewhere on that, and again it needs to be in the doors layer. And please note that with the likes of the front door there is a slope. Because there's level access required under building control, you should be showing the slope lines at the doors. And again, at this door window assembly here, we have the double doors that would open in the middle. Technically there really should be something of a frame in the middle part of that door as well. So we'll just trim that out a little bit to try and see roughly what that would look like. And again, you may wish to put a handle or something on there. The frame might need to be a little bit thicker than that, but something indicative to show that those are doors and the other two are windows. Slope here and the slope layer. Again, you'll not necessarily see that as a true slope, but make sure that it looks sufficient in terms of what might be required. Another thing to add to the elevation is these little tags here. They just indicate where the finished floor level is for the ground floor. So basically a little triangle with a piece of text centered over it. And the same sort of style up here. I would include that a few times just so that each elevation, it's clear beside the elevations where the levels are. And really the way those downpipes are, again, they should be carried straight up to the gutter like so, and we'll stretch that across there, and we'll extend that line up there. So it should be straight on the front and back elevation, but on the side elevation, really what you should be showing here is a semicircle. So let's make that 50 wide and just copy the properties from that over and draw a line from one quadrant over to the other. We'll trim, again match properties. I'll just make that layer current, I suppose. Now the distance that is down is 50. So let's lift that, move it, hover over that point and move the cursor. Well, let's set it there and move it then, just to be 100% sure in terms of the accuracy. And then we know that the down pipe is over there already, so let's copy that across. And in terms of the distance that is, we can move that at the mid between the 2 points and just put it there on the top line. Then we can trim it. And some point below the fascia, then what you need to do is actually angle that to bring it in close to the face of the house. So let's choose nearest, just pick a point there and make sure we're picking up an angle at 45 degrees. Okay. Now we don't want it to be right tight in against the house, so let's offset that front face by 25. And then we can offset again by 75 and offset that one in that direction. Then we can match the properties, and then we can use the fillet tool to indicate roughly where the down pipe would travel, ensuring then that the line is carried right down to ground level, which it is in this case. That needs to be repeated obviously for the other elements, including this lean-to roof, and obviously the side elevation for the other side needs to indicate where they are. It might overlap things in places. Remember that it will be behind that corner windowsill, but it might actually be in front of the door here whenever you draw that. So take care just whenever you're inserting the down pipes. The other elements then that need to be added in, if you have time at the end, would be the brickwork. And as I demonstrated in class, the lines up the brickwork there, they need to be at 75mm in between, and take care not to continue the lines in front of the down pipes. Take care around all the openings and below the sills, and just fill in all the gaps there that would be brickwork. As I said, the distance is 75mm. It's pretty quick with the array tool if you use that. So let's just demonstrate that. The array tool, and what we want is one column, and in terms of rows we'll put 5 in for now, and the distance we'll make that 75, and if we lift the grip point then we can fill that in accordingly to the gap that's there. Okay, so we can explode that if need be at the end and take out some of the lines if we don't need them, and we'll just leave that in. Again, in a space like this, what you might want to do is just copy some of those up. That can be just as easy, and then copy 2 more like so. And for the roof itself then, we do need to indicate that it's a tiled roof, so the lines need to be shown on the roof there. Now what is the distance that's being used between those lines? 150. Okay, so basically if you're wanting to do that, it should really be on the roof layer, which it wasn't in this case. But we'll just move that over to the roof layer. There is no roof layer. That's why it's not the roof layer on that drawing. But if you put those on the roof layer and just make the color red, that will show the roof in an appropriate manner. So hopefully that gives you enough to get the elevations fairly close to being finished and accurately drawn.